Dr. Susan Grantham, lecturer in communication at Griffith University in Australia.
Brilliant. So it's lovely to have you here, and I'm really interested in the research that you published fairly recently. Can you just give us some kind of the highlights of it?
Yeah, okay. So this particular body of research was around crisis communication. I have a strong interest in crisis communication because of my background in police and justice and managing crisis events. So what I basically did was I looked at two significant events that occurred in Queensland. We had two back-to-back cyclones. And I analysed the media conferencing, which is the press briefings that occur during these sorts of events. I analysed those because that's the information that generally goes direct to the public. They are live streamed on the more traditional social media accounts such as Facebook, YouTube, etc. But during those events, as I was collecting that information, I noticed a strong use of TikTok. Now, I researched TikTok from a different angle, but I thought, how interesting if I collect what's trending on TikTok during these severe weather events. So, as the tropical cyclones were crossing, were making landfall, I collected what was algorithmically displayed to me. So, the top 50 TikTok videos that were algorithmically displayed as the cyclones were making landfall, and analyzed those, looking for what information was actually available to people if they were experiencing the cyclone, not knowing what to do, and went to TikTok for information, which is ultimately what most of society does these days. Um, and what I found was that during the first severe weather event, which was a quite an interesting political moment of turmoil, our premier had just resigned and our new premier had just taken over. So what we saw was this overwhelming misuse of TikTok to give information to people, such as, collecting flood water, going into flood water, doing silly things outside in the elements of the storm, which is all very much against what that traditional government messaging is, versus the second event. So when we had the back-to-back event, the second event, that TikTok data actually saw this uprising of local content creators who would be classified as influencers because of the number of followers that they have, using their platform to actually inform. So one in particular, who was a mumfluencer, a mum of twins, she did several videos of just packing up her house. This is how I tie things down. This is what I remove. This is what is okay outside. So what I then found was we go through this information in one event into this one platform to provide solid advice to people who maybe have never experienced a cyclone before. Because if you haven't experienced a cyclone, they're actually quite a traumatic event. So that was just such an interesting finding that I found in that TikTok data, that also found that there was no government messaging within that TikTok data, which I thought was quite surprising. Yeah, whether it's creating relationships with existing influencers or whether it is a watch and see type event driven thing. And the reason I say that is because Queensland, like obviously I'm focusing on Queensland and Australia, very, very large geographical location. So, and severe weather events can happen anywhere across the state. It just happened that during this event, and I'm talking 5 to 6 days leading up, some of this content was starting to appear. Um, they started to emerge. So I see this as a wonderful opportunity for governments or police organisations that manage these sorts of weather events to reach out to those emerging creators and create an immediate relationship. So while we won't necessarily see governments or policing agencies have a list of influencers that they're going to contact, we need to be better prepared to notice when someone is emerging on platforms in data, and be comfortable to reach out to them and see if they can help share the correct government official messaging.
You talk about an interesting sort of challenge between the balance of authority and immediacy. Can you kind of just explain what that means.
Yeah, so it's a couple of the big issues with a platform like TikTok is that it's algorithmically driven. So you either use it correctly, which then allows you to create that immediate content. And what I mean by that is that you need to be engaging on the platform. The platform will only support your content and prioritize your content if you're using the platform properly. So that is going to mean you need to engage with trends, you need to engage with trending sounds, you need to use the affordances of the platform to ensure that your account is deemed to be algorithmically viable. Then, when those immediate events occur, that will see the algorithm prioritize your content. So the immediacy aspect becomes prioritized within the algorithm, but only if you're using it consistently and effectively and becoming a content creator in your own right.
You think that, I mean, is there a need to kind of explain or get kind of senior people to understand this? A lot of time when I'm talking to communicators, they kind of understand some of the way that social media develops and some of the challenges and the issues and the things they need to do. But it's their senior kind of managers, senior leaders who
Mm.
go, no, 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 TikTok's for uh, funny dances and all those things. Um, is there a need to kind of address some of that and how perhaps your research can do that?
Yeah, someone termed it as TikTok snobbery to me recently, and I do think that's a really nice way of describing that we see TikTok as this younger generation, Gen Z, crazy dances, trends. Yes, sure, it is. But when you actually look at how young people are engaging on TikTok, they're not just going for the fun and the trends. That is where they go for news. That's where they go for information. It's now used as a search engine, so all sorts of content actually exists in there. And if we point back to Australia, our recent federal election, we saw all parties and most candidates actively engaging with TikTok. So certainly in Australia, in the US, in parts of South America, most political groups are starting to recognize that it's not just a silly platform, it's actually an important information platform where a large chunk of society actually go to for important information.
And one of the other aspects of the kind of research, you look at the political message, well, messaging with using kind of political spokespeople or kind of school organizations. Can you just kind of give a flavor of what you found from that aspect?
Yeah, so I do two lots of research here. I do the crisis stuff that looks at TikTok, but I also look at the ways in which politicians and political parties use TikTok. And I certainly find that the work that I've done in Australia, in the UK, in the US, and parts of South America, I've found vastly different approaches to government and official TikTok uses. So particularly in Australia, we seem to be a little more comfortable to delve into the fun and humorous side of TikTok and the trends of TikTok, which basically help to promote the next video. And when I say the next video, what I'm talking about there is the important information video. So in my recent politics study of our federal election that occurred earlier this year, I found a bit of a pattern in that we saw a couple of trend driven videos that got insanely high engagement levels. And then the next video would be quite policy driven, which didn't necessarily get the huge engagement, but it was still high enough engagement to get that message across. So there's this sort of pattern of if you engage with trends, if you engage with the affordances of the platform, then your next serious video will also be picked up algorithmically. So that's an important pattern that needs to be understood and explored a little further because algorithms obviously change regularly. So while that worked during, our May election, it might not work right now. Yeah, so there's two things that I'm currently working on. The first is that we've since that those two severe weather events, we had another one, as we do in Queensland. We had a tropical cyclone that came through metropolitan Brisbane, which is very unusual. It's very far south for this type of weather event, but we had that occur earlier this year. We had had a change of government by then. So the current premier actually went live on TikTok. So those media briefings that were traditionally live on Facebook and YouTube went live on TikTok. So that's my current study, is exploring how that maybe was done differently and the level of engagement that occurred compared to those other events. Then separate to that, we are entering into our next severe weather event season. So I'm working with a couple of people within government to try to look at ways that we might be able to action my proposal. That once we know a severe weather event is coming, we can get a sense of who is within that area of Queensland and engage them to create content that actually reinforces the government messaging, and then obviously collect some data around that and see how viable this could be as an approach moving forward. Yeah, I often tell people to take that big step back and go back to traditional strategic communication approaches. So, number one is, who are you going to be trying to reach? And does that include a generation that you're not currently reaching? Because we have to remember, as the strategic communicators, that the audience we're trying to speak to isn't always us. And sometimes that means stepping outside of our comfort zone and communicating on a platform that we're not that familiar with. So if you know that there is a younger generation that is heavily reliant on TikTok, do you have a TikTok platform account, whether it be official, unofficial, high level politics, low level at the organizational approach? If not, start it. And then once you've started it, post, 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 post. Get a following, get the algorithm recognizing that you exist. Do the fun stuff now because you're going to need it for when the serious stuff happens.